Welcome to the Michael Simmons Show, where we help you create blockbuster content that changes the world and builds your business. We dive deep into the habits and hacks of today's top thought leaders. Now, here's the show.
Today, we have another awesome guest. His name is Jono Hey. He has a site called Sketchplanations, where once a week, he takes a complicated idea, often a mental model, and turns it into a visual. I have shared literally dozens of his images in the different Facebook groups. I've embedded it in the content that we have, and it's always some of the best performing content. And I always admire people who take a complex idea, turn it into a visual or with a little bit of text, and make it something that people would understand and something that's viral. And that's what Jono has really done well. And so in this interview, we really break down his whole process for his routine throughout the week and his advice on how you too can create visuals just like he does. I think you'll really enjoy it. Welcome to the podcast, Jono.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here.
We've spoken once before, but I've long been an admirer of your work and shared it a lot across our channels. And people that follow us really appreciate it as well. So I'm excited to dive in and just learn more about your story and how you think about visuals and communicating complex ideas through them.
Yeah, super.
And so from my understanding, you got a PhD in design. You're focused on user experience product. But in 2012, so just about 8 years ago, you made the decision to do one sketch per day. What caused you, besides just getting the sketchbook that had the space for one sketch per day, what made you want to do that experiment?
Yeah, I guess it came from two things. Fundamentally, one was that I was given a thing to do a drawing a day, and I did that for a year, just personal things, and it was just nice. It's just nice to have something to keep you focused each day and just to work on something. And I got to the end of that, and I just felt like it was going to be a bit of a shame to stop.
Did you have any experience doing illustration before that? I know you had experience in design, but how about just drawing illustration?
Yeah, to some degree. I think I've always been a visual person. I remember being back at school. I was always good at the science and the maths side of things, but the bit I enjoyed the most was always the just drawing. I have memories of drawing while on holidays, and I remember having this really lovely poster on my wall. It was actually like an airbrushed Lamborghini, I think, but it had this cutaway motor, and I remember it was so impressive how they'd done all the components of the motor as well as it being a beautiful drawing. So I've done some drawing before, but it was always it's drawing in service of something, which is why I went the sort of product design route. But then I got to the end of these sketches for the year, and I was kind of like, well, I want to still be doing something useful, and I thought that my job as a designer was always about communicating and explaining what's going on to people. So could I practice that at the same time? And so I said, okay, well, I'll try and explain something with a sketch. And so so instead of just the straight drawing, I was like, let's do something where I get some more value out of it than just a pretty picture.
And so that was the birth of Sketchplanations.
That was it. And it was very much a personal project at the beginning. I was only doing it for myself, and then I started sort of posting them on Facebook, and at some point somebody said, you should put these online somewhere. So I started doing that, and here I am.
So you're doing one post were you doing one post for Sketchplanations per day? And you kept that up for a year or two as well?
So I did it a year of doing one a day, which is quite intense.
And how many hours, how long did it take you to do one sketch? You have to find the idea, brainstorm, and
yeah, it really varies. I used to try and set it down so that I could do them in a lunchtime, and I managed to get a bit ahead, which was nice. And so sometimes, if you had a busy day, I had one that I'd done when I'd done 3 in a day at a weekend sometime. Typically, sometimes you just can see a really clear way to just do something, or a nice format for something, and you just sit down, and in 25 minutes I'll go, okay, brilliant, I've done it. Other times I'm like, is that really how it works? I have to go do my research, I read some articles, I try a few different things, and then do that. And those might take me several hours, even if they look really small at the end and simple.
Interesting. So it could be really, so the main bottleneck wasn't actually the drawing. It's really the ideation of how you capture the essence of this idea.
Yeah. And then often I experiment with a few different like variations first before I put my pen to paper,
And one theory I have, and then you switched, well, before I even go into that. So you did that for a while. Then as a parent, you have a job on the side. You went to once a week to make it more manageable. And you've been doing that for 5 years or so.
Yeah, maybe a bit more, maybe 6 years, I think. I actually went to 2 a week. I was like, okay, well, if I can do 1 a day, clearly I could do 2 a week. And I found this interesting thing that 2 a week is just like too vague. You're like, you can always do 1 tomorrow. And then you don't do 1 tomorrow. And actually, I was much worse at hitting 2 a week than when I said, okay, look, if I just do 1 a week, I was a really clear, simple target, and I stuck with that. So that's worked.
You can always say, hey, I haven't done 1 for this week. Let me do 1 right now. And it just feels manageable to do.
Yeah. Whereas 2 is ambiguous. Well, I can do it on Tuesday, but I could also do it on Wednesday. I don't know. So what, Seth Godin has a thing about the power of 1 a day. And I think that's true. Just doing 1 thing a day just as a really clear target. But if you're not doing that, that's too much. 1 a week is much better than 2 a week. In my experience.
One thing I've been processing and just trying to think about what it means is this idea of 1 a day. So the first person I interviewed was Nicholas Cole, and he started off on Quora just answering 1 question per day, 2014-ish. Now his content's been seen by over 100 million people. And he's gotten to that like hardcore rhythm of just producing 1 per day. And it is kind of crazy that if you keep that up, it's super intense, harder when you have children, but that somebody doing 1 of those per day versus 1 per week, it's only not only 7x the output, but it might be 15x the momentum of just how things are scrunched up. You might hit that elbow of the exponential curve faster or something like that. What are your thoughts on just sheer output and whether going from 1 to a day to 7 a day shifted things?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, certainly just the volume makes you improve. Although I have to say, if you're trying to produce a really quality output, in some ways, everybody is better off that I'm doing 1 a week than 1 a day. Now, it depends how much time you can make in your day in order to do this stuff. And I'm sure if I could spend a morning each day, I would do a really good one each day. But actually, I think there'd be so many times I'd be like, I just need to get 1 done this day, that it would be mediocre compared to when I've actually had a few days to sort of ruminate on it during a week.
Right.
Probably the output as a result is better. But definitely. I remember really interesting speech by Arnold Schwarzenegger, and he was like, you know what? If you just spend 1 hour a day trying to learn something, over a year, you'll be almost an expert. You've done 360 hours of it. So there is something to like finding that 1 a day goal, and there's something so simple about you. Just once you've settled in, you've committed to it. You don't have to think; you just have to do it. That's
and
nice.
Do you spend more time per post now? You mentioned kind of you're ruminating on it. Is that informal during the week, or would you say that has helped you to? Has 1 post per day been just as effective for you as 7 posts because you're spending more time per post? You're letting it ruminate, and it's higher quality.
Yeah, I think they're better. I think I tackle slightly harder things. I do them I execute them better, and I do more research beforehand. I've realized, if you're just doing a picture for yourself, it doesn't matter actually whether or not it's right or wrong. If you're going to send something out to tens of thousands of people, you better do your homework first.
Right. Yeah.
And so even if I think something is this way, or I think this is this theory or this model, you need to go do your research before you spread false content. So yeah, I think it's better. And actually, I did notice that when I'm organized enough, if I do some early variations, I actually have like a little sort of circle of people that I'll send a couple of options to and say, hey, do these make sense to you? And actually, that always makes things better.
Interesting. So can you tell me a little bit more about your weekly process to what is it, the steps that go into making a sketch? And then I loved how you explained the feedback loop there with multiple people. What are
Mm-hmm.
the steps like that go into an output?
Yeah, good question. So first off, I think I have it's the idea, I suppose. So I don't know. I've been trained over the last near a decade just to keep an eye out all the time for things that would be interesting to explain or something that I find is interesting that could benefit with being shared. So I have a huge list of
Interesting.
potential topics. So
What
sometimes sorry, go ahead.
what makes what makes something interesting? I know you have the taste now. It's probably a lot unconscious, but what jumps out to you?
Yeah, it's an intriguing thing. I think that one thing I've learned is I can't always tell what people will find interesting. So my goal, and I remember, somebody was like, "Oh, you should poll your readers and find out what they're interested in, and just do that." And then I was like, "Well, this is not a job. This is something I want to do for my interest. So I should do things that I find are interesting." But I don't know. I think the things that work best or most interesting in a way are the ones where there's kind of a model or some theory, which is the sort of thing you might be reading, like Thinking Fast and Slow by Dan Kahneman, and there's a chapter on this thing, and there's some paragraphs, and you read all that, and you kind of gently absorb this idea, but it's easy to forget, and it doesn't stick. And so to take some concept like that, like prospect theory or whatever they are, and just go, can I make this? Can I boil this down into a sketch? That those are the ones that are a bit more interesting. But sometimes I think things that just have a nice visual aspect to them. I did a kind of dumb one, and this, like, what's a fruit and what's a vegetable, and is tomato a fruit? And actually,
sometimes there's these border ones that are hard to.
Yeah, and so I was trying to just get clear on this for myself, and I was like, you know what, I should just try and sketch this out. And so I made that my sketch this week, and just something where I find myself noodling on what's the real answer here.
Well, one thing that I think is interesting that I heard you address a little bit is there's a tension between why we do it. Is it for ourselves, of just learning, or we want to obviously have things that are for ourselves, but also resonate with other people? My personal belief is that soul market fit, like doing it for ourselves, is the most important part, because that's what keeps you going, or that's one of the core things that keeps you going. So if you're on a topic that you're just bored by, or not excited to share, you're just not going to be as good or convincing, authentic, have as much runway. But of course, if you don't get any traction or things like that, it's easy to, all right, why am I even doing this? How do you think about the tension between those two? And do you have any counterintuitive approaches of a unique way of doing it, you think?
Yeah, it's good. It's a good question. So I definitely think there's a tension there, because I think, like, there is some satisfaction in doing something which has value to other people. So it's important to pay attention to, if nobody's doing it, I might as well just be doing these sketches and hanging them in my garage.
Right.
And then you go, okay, well, like, if it enriches my life, that's fine. But maybe I could have a wider impact. But that said, I definitely feel like you, like it's not a job. I'm not being paid to do this. So I think it really is important that they're things that I think are interesting. And also, I have learned a bit to trust my instincts in the sense that it's a bit like, you people don't necessarily the whole, like, if you ask people what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse kind of thing.
Right.
Want until you see it. And so in some ways, if I feel confident that something could be worth explaining, or it's going to be good, I should give that a go, because even if somebody wouldn't ask me for it, maybe they will, when they see it, they will think it's interesting. And
you
also,
haven't had anybody ask you to do a sketch on the vegetable versus a fruit yet?
No, nobody asked me that one. No, although I did receive a response if somebody could explain berries. Berries are immensely complicated. Well, there you go. But yeah, I think you have to be interested in it to want to put the effort in and to do a really good job. Like you have to be passionate about it. So so I think there's maybe a bit of a balance, but I decided with Sketchplanations that I would trust my own instincts and go, I want to draw stuff that I find interesting, and I hope that that's interesting to others.
And when I think about improving at a skill, in my mind, I break it down to two fundamental components. Number one is the number of repetitions, and just doing over and over. And then number two is improvement. And a lot of times people fail because they don't do any repetitions. So they just give up, stop doing it, or they're doing it over and over, but they're not improving at all. And and sometimes the improvement can just happen on its own, but sometimes getting outside feedback. And so what have you created in place to make sure that you improve over these 7 years? Well, I guess one, do you feel like you have improved, and what things have made you improve? You mentioned you send out for feedback to people, things like that.
Yeah, it is a good question. I have noticed, and I don't know if if you post things online, I have noticed you get very different degrees of feedback depending on the medium that you post stuff. So I don't know, if you post something on Twitter, you get likes, and so you go, okay, lots of people like this one, so maybe that was a good one. But if you send something out by email, you might get even no responses or one, but then you might get one response, which is this big, long, thoughtful message about how something touched them, or how this was relevant for them. And so I think there is something about like you don't necessarily get great feedback, or you get very different types of feedback depending on how you share things. I think for me, probably, when you're posting these things, they're out there publicly forever, and I see them, I come back to them, and you put something out and you make a mistake and you're like, wish I hadn't made that mistake. And so, when I look back, I can see which ones I think have really worked and see which ones I think really didn't. And I sort of, I feel like you bear that in mind all the time in the subsequent ones that you're doing. And so,
analyzing the winners and losers, do you do that based off, when you say it didn't work or worked, do you mean that you're looking at the likes and comments, the external, or do you mean internal? You look at it and you're just like, I don't really get this one, and I would have done this differently.
Yeah, it's actually, so there is that external feedback, but there's also just my viewpoint on it. So, I ones where I look back and go, I did a really good job there, or ones I look back and go, you know what, I could have done better. I remember, just to give one example, we used to take a lot of photographs before we had kids. So we go on a trip for a weekend, and we come back and we'd have all our photographs, and we'd do some sorting. And we used to be the point where like hard drive space mattered, so I used to delete some. And I just remember that process of sifting through all your photographs and saying, is this a good one? Is this one? And you got 3 similar photographs, and you go, well, what's better about this one than that one? And that process of just continually looking at things and going, this one's better. Why is that one better? Oh, it's because of that. And so I think I kind of get that when you accumulate this big body of work, you can sort of look back at them and go, these ones were really good. That one, not so much.
Yeah, it's interesting, the comparison between internal and external feedback loops and how that drives our decision. So let's say there's externally how you measure your success and what you do, and then externally you can measure by likes and feedbacks, and then internally there's that soul market fit as a motivation source, and then as a feedback loop, your own taste. And one thing I think about interesting about taste is that there's studies done for people with deliberate practice, and experts could identify like 10 times more mistakes than novices. So let's say it's a musical instrument, they could listen to an old performance they did, and an expert could be able to notice the errors and therefore self-correct better, versus a novice couldn't. And so it sounds like there's a way that you built up your taste, somehow developed over time, such that when you reflect on it, you could see how it's better. Do you feel like the effect of being able to give your own feedback loop is just the separation of time and you have a fresh perspective, or it's about taste? And if so, how did you develop that taste to be able to self-correct better?
Yeah, I think maybe another key aspect of the learning process in doing these is actually as I'm doing them. And so it's actually also interesting with the medium. So I used to do them all pen and paper. Like I would carry these beautiful little moleskin notebooks around and fill them out with pens. Lovely little.
Oh, those are nice.
Yeah, so they're actually like lovely little artifacts to look at.
Wow, that looks like it's really. I mean, it looks really good. Like you almost like.
Yeah.
I don't know. Pasted it on like a sticker or something.
Yeah, exactly. So that was a good challenge, but I switched to doing it digitally. And one thing you get with digitally, obviously, is you can undo, you can erase, you can take a layer, you can sometimes copy it, you can, I can do different versions of it. And this is also like the process of doing a sketch through the week. Is let's say I do a version of it on Tuesday. And then 2 days later, I look back at it again and I'm like, you know what? It's not really as clear as I thought it was at the time. Maybe I should change the colors of these. Maybe it needs to be all on the left. Maybe, and I think that iterative process on each sketch itself, I definitely learned some principles of making stuff better, which I'm then applying to the next ones every time. So
how many loops would you say you do on your own iterations?
Yeah, it depends quite a lot. As I say, sometimes I would just have a really clear idea in my head and just go do it. Other times I've probably done, I don't know, 8 to 10 variations where I've like done this and then I've been like, no, that's not right. Or I've done that and then I could have tightened up that language and then I change it again. So I'll end up, sometimes I'll end up with quite a lot. But normally it's probably like 3 or 4.
And one thing I think about is Edward de Bono has 6 hats, different perspectives that you could have on your own work to create a better feedback loop. And so I think about wearing different hats when I go into reviewing my own work. So let's say I'm reviewing an article and I'm reviewing for comprehensiveness. I'll notice things to improve differently than if I'm reviewing it for conciseness, where at that point I'll just take out words and noticing different things. For you, are you mainly just going back to each one and just going with a gut feel of this looks good, this doesn't, or here's what's off? Or do you have a lens that you're looking back on it with?
Yeah, it's a really good point. I've never like consciously sat and done like a different hat review for sketches, but I think there are different things. So sometimes you might just look at it and like, even if you like blur your eyes or just remember what you did, you go like, did it have like visual impact as a sketch? So like a really sort of broad brush sort of thing. Other times you might be going in and going, you know what, these words are too long. Can I shorten this by half? Other times it's like, layout. Does it, if you're following through a drawing, is it clear where I'm expecting you to go next to process this as a little story? And so I think there are like different things that I'm checking in those reviews. The thinking hats, I should probably try that. Nice.
Are there any? Those are great. So kind of one, the visual impact, and you can kind of see that by blurring your eyes. So maybe some of the finer details go away and you just see the visual conciseness and the sequence of it. Anything else that you look for in your own images or patterns?
Yeah, maybe one. It's not for every sketch, but some of them I think maybe have. I say, did it like grab me emotionally in a way? And like obviously that doesn't apply to everything, but some where I've got like a story or a scenario or a character saying something. I think there's did you capture the emotion of that moment? Is that gonna stick with you? Give an example. I did one recently about hope, and there's a nice model for hope, which I'd never really thought about before. Whereas is like you're more likely to be hopeful if you have clear goals, if you can see pathways to get to those goals, and if you have the willpower and belief that you can do it.
I like that.
Yeah, and so this is just the sort of thing I think which actually made a really good sketch, because you read this in a book and it's it's a page or two of text, and it just doesn't. It might stick with you, but actually just capturing that in one little sketch in a way that you could share really quickly was much better. But I had this sort of abstract picture of like a gentle hill with a goal at the top and a character and a line towards it. And I just like, it just didn't grab me. And I remember I changed it in the next iteration to a picture. This is an amazing picture of a mountain in Pakistan from a climber I like, which is just this really super impressive picture. And you just imagine this guy with the backpack on trying to get to the top of that peak. And in some ways that just grabbed me much more emotionally.
Yeah.
So I think that's one of the things that, I'm also kind of checking for, like, can you relate to this?
Interesting. Can you relate? Well, yeah, the emotion's one thing, but then when you say, can you relate to that? Like, are you thinking about that too? Can the reader see themselves there, or like, oh yeah, I could relate. That makes sense.
I think so. Yeah. In many scenarios, I mean, it totally depends what I'm sketching. I've got one here of like, how to tell if an egg is off. I don't know if you ever relate to that. It's totally different, but in certain cases, how to tell if an egg is still fresh.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah,
so, I haven't related. Well, I guess I look at the crack, but I would be interested in if you had something on that.
I'll send it on afterwards.
And when you're sending for feedback, do you just send it to people and say, hey, what do you think about this? Or do you have a specific survey you have them fill out or question that you find is really helpful?
No, I mean, it's all entirely voluntary for people to send feedback. So I'm always mindful not to ask too much. But I guess one thing I've learned, and this is partly from being a designer, is that I like to keep things open ended because sometimes the feedback you need is like, I just don't get this at all.
Right.
Rather than that writing's a bit too small. I'd much rather they told me they just didn't get it at all. So I try to keep stuff pretty broad. And the other way I think you get better feedback is if you give two options, two or more even, and that way it sort of reduces the that feeling of like, I have to tell this guy I just don't really like it. They can just say, I much prefer the other one. You know what I mean?
Oh, like, two options for work. Which one do you like more? Oh, interesting.
Exactly. And then you also learn what about one version was actually good. Because they say, this one jumps out at me much more. I don't know. And you go, yeah, you're right. That is better. So that's what I've learned when I'm gathering feedback is I try, where possible, to always send two different variations. Even if I've got a favorite, I'll try and go, well, you know what, can I just think up some other way that this could be done and just put it out there just as a check I'm on the right track.
Yeah, I like that. And also, that's a really good point about big picture versus little picture. That if somebody says adds a comma here, it's helpful, but if you add a comma on visual, that's just not good. That's not helping that much. Versus if they really help you save your time, or that could be really good.
Exactly, and that sort of big picture feedback is sometimes quite hard to get. And I don't know, maybe you need either like to be really separated from that person so they just don't care about your feelings, or they need to like be just, have a good relationship with them and be really honest.
I feel like in the past few years, communicating ideas visually of abstract ideas has become more popular. The first time I really saw it was Wait But Why with Tim Urban and doing that. I'm like, wow, this is really cool. And it helps me understand it better. And your work and Amber Ray. I've also one person is Jessica Hagee. She has an index cards. Do you know her work?
I have come across Jessica. I haven't looked for a while, but yeah.
Jack Butcher with Visualize Value. So it feels like, at least I'm noticing more people doing this. What are your thoughts on where the power of visual communication and how you see it evolving online with complex ideas?
Yeah, I mean, I'm, mine's this kind of sort of random story to get into this, but I definitely think that I see that there are a lot of people out there producing some really great stuff, and I think a lot of it is the medium that things are shared in. Sometimes you want to, sit down and read a long article and really get into something, and sometimes you have formats like Instagram and Twitter where just like something you just throw up quickly just to get the message across, something that's easily shareable, something that sticks with you, even if there's a link to go read more, helps. Yeah, I always remember for me, I took some education courses at university, and the format of classes was generally like you go do the reading and you come and sit around a table and then you discuss the questions. And for me, it was always this sort of, I don't know, stream of words in the air. And at the end of it, you're like, I think I changed my understanding through that, but I don't have anything concrete or tangible to hang my ideas off. And I think whenever you get that sort of clarity by turning something which is a bit more abstract into something visual, just helps ideas stick. And I think, yeah, I couldn't say exactly why there seems to be more of it right now. But maybe, perhaps it is actually, just general things like the internet that deals with images much better now. The tools for producing them are genuinely much better. Like I can actually do a digital one on an iPad with a pencil, and it's pretty good. And it didn't used to be, yeah.
So the main tool that you use right now is Apple Pencil and an iPad. And at first you started with more doing it non-digitally, but now digitally is the way to go. Do you feel for someone just starting off with wanting to get to illustrations?
I wouldn't say that it is the way to go necessarily. I think there was just something lovely about having this small notebook and a couple of really nice pens that's really satisfying. And if you're just getting out started, that's plenty good enough. And you know what? If you've got a whiteboard and a whiteboard pen, that's good enough. So I feel like, a lot of the sketches that I do are simple. There's like a black, maybe there's a red, and there's a line drawing. It doesn't have to be fancy or complicated. So I don't think you need any fancy tools to get started. And in fact, sometimes I think like the technology, like you have to learn it, and it will be a little barrier to getting going. So I'd probably say the nicest thing is take a little sketchbook and a couple of pens, something that fits in your pocket in your bag, and you can always have
practice. Yeah, I like that. And one thing I've noticed too is that a lot of designers that I follow, like the ones that I mentioned, they get a style and then they stay with it. So, with you, all of your ones have the same yellow background. You use maybe 3 colors, like let's say green, orange/red, or blue one, very rarely. And it's handwriting style. And Jessica Hage's, all of hers she actually uses like a marker, black and white, on an index card, then she scans it in. And so for me, I've used different tools and very beginner, but I always find it hard to commit to one thing. You feel like finding your thing is more of an iterative thing, that don't try to look for it in the beginning. It'll just find you, and then you'll just kind of do it naturally? Or would you encourage people to figure that out sooner to make it simpler for them?
Yeah, no, I think it's, unless you're about to turn it into a business straight away, I'd say it's a very like evolving thing, and I'd let it just evolve. Yeah, like definitely, I feel like I've got a style that I've decided to stick with. And I guess
how long did it take you to find that?
Yeah, it's funny. It's funny to look back at the early ones, and they're much more scattered and more varied, but sometimes still quite nice. It was probably like a year or so before I was sticking to like a
so like hundreds of images then.
Yeah, that is hundreds. Yeah,
yeah.
But like the sort of yellow background just comes from the paper notebook that I was scanning.
Interesting. That's really funny. It was kind of happenstance.
Yeah. But actually, if you look at it as a collection, they become quite distinctive that way. And I think it means that you can look at one and go, oh, I know that this is a Sketchplanation. I know what's expected. And I also think, like you say, about the different tools that like Jessica might use. There's something about having a limited set of means that you're going to do it that helps. It sort of constrains your problem space. You put a few constraints. I'm going to use black and red, nothing too fancy, and it's just going to be a sketch thing. And sometimes that helps the ideas crystallize a bit more, when you apply a few constraints, I think.
And you're obviously coming from a design world. Someone like me or other people here, let's just assume that people are not coming from a design world. And granted, the work you're doing, you're not showing off all your design skills. You are keeping it simple. Same thing with Jessica Hagee or Jack Butcher, or even Wait But Why. But are there any books that you'd recommend that are really helpful, or resources just to get some of the basics that one might be missing? if never had a course?
Yeah, there are a couple actually. I mean, one of the classic ones was Dan Rome's Back of the Napkin.
Yeah.
And I always remember, like in that, he says, like if you can draw squares, circles, and lines, then you can draw enough to make decent drawings, useful drawings. What one I like that I think a lot of people probably don't know. There's a book called Rapid Viz.
I don't know that one.
Actually, I have got it here by Kurt Hanks and Larry Belliston. It's quite old, and it's a really nice. Obviously, they are accomplished artists. I think they did a lot of architecture style drawings. I love architectural style drawings, but the purpose of it is to help you communicate with the drawing, which is I think what architects are trying to do rather than produce a pretty drawing. Is just to communicate something, and so they go through a lot of drawing techniques, but in the service of just getting your ideas across quickly. I think that's a really nice one that I think a lot of people probably haven't come across.
Thank you. I'm going to check that one out. And when it comes down to the nitty gritty of, let's say you're at, you have an idea, and for you, it might be natural to be like, oh, I could use a mountain because a mountain means a journey, or I could use these characters saying thought bubbles. Is there a way that you break it down further, that you have a list of metaphors that you use, or images that are like your alphabet in a way?
Yeah. Good question. I think it's true that I do keep, and I think it really helps to have a number of different sort of models in mind that you can draw on. Sometimes somebody's done all the work for you, right? Like if you're doing Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like it's only ever been drawn as a pyramid, and you know what, the pyramid probably helps it sort of stick.
Right. And gold, I saw your Simon Sinek Golden Circle one. He kind of already has that.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm not reinventing it. I'm just sort of sharing one there. But if you keep a number of models, like what you see out there, like Venn diagrams or charts or tables, sometimes it might be like, oh, you want to do a before and after, or you want to compare on a number of attributes, ladders, pyramids. Sometimes it's nice just to be literal. I don't know. That's an old sketch I did was knowing your Bactrian from your dromedary camels. And it's a really nice little way of doing it. A Bactrian camel is the one with two humps, which is like a B on its side. And the dromedary is a D with just the one hump, and so you've got like a really visual.
Right. Yeah.
But I think, so I do keep in mind when there's an abstract sort of concept that I'm trying to explain, like you've got all those kind of models that you could lean on, like, whether it's a ladder or a hierarchy or something like that. And these things can help. And sometimes, as I say, it's just like I don't, you probably read Made to Stick.
Yeah.
And, just there's things that tap into an emotion or a story or some surprising situation. I think sometimes if you pick the right, I think, what did I do recently? One around the RACI, responsibility, accountability, consulted and informed. And I don't know, I came up with this idea of a scenario: you're at the beach and you're building a sandcastle. And I wanted to take this like really sort of slightly boring business management idea, put it somewhere really concrete, where the kid is the one responsible for building the sandcastle, and the dad's going to make sure it's staying up, and the mum's reading a book and saying, "How's it going on?" And I feel like. So there's another one where you're just trying to find the right scenario, and there's lots of different scenarios you could do. But I do find sometimes if I stay too abstract, they just don't resonate. They're just not interesting.
So putting it with characters and having some sort of interaction with them to make it more relatable.
I think so. So I try and the feedback I often get when I ask for feedback is for examples. And
interesting.
The challenge is often, if you were going to do like a SWOT analysis or something, it's one thing to like just write out, here are the things you should look for. But if you find a good example to use that on, A, it makes it visual, and B, it makes it stick, and C, it makes it like interesting as a drawing as well. So I do spend some time there thinking, actually, what would be a better example of this?
Yeah, I like your cost of being late one. It's very simple, but the person walking to the door, there's a 10 over them for 10 minutes late, but then there's a whole table of people sitting there, and there's tons of 10s around there. Just for whatever clicks in your mind, a different way of just how sounds it makes it just normally you would think, oh, I'm just late. That's fine. They just really see the cost of it.
Yeah, I think in that sort of scenario, you're going, what? It's an invisible cost normally because you don't see this time that's being wasted, and so visually, you need to make the one person who thinks it's just 10 minutes, and then a whole other thing, which is now big because you've written 10 all these times, and so it's this big thing where you suddenly made that what was sort of intangible and invisible and abstract. You made it now comparable, a big thing versus a small thing. I don't want to say that's the best example, but I think that's where the visual helps, right? Because you suddenly go, oh, I see it. Where you sat around a table in a meeting, you didn't see that 10 minutes of waste of everybody's time. Yeah.
And you mentioned a few visual types, which I kind of think as an alphabet. You mentioned Venn diagram, before and after, and even in there, what you just mentioned, the cost of being late. I didn't see it, but now when you explained it, I saw it. It kind of has a comparison, not a before and after or side by side. I feel like those do really well. I've noticed pyramid, ladder, mountain. Are there ones that you feel like are the 80-20 here of most ideas? For example, Jessica Hagee, all of hers, almost all of them are Venn diagrams and then a line, dot chart.
Yeah, I guess I don't tend to do a lot of Venn diagrams, and I think part of that is that unless you really grab people with like what these topics are, it stays kind of this abstract thing, and it's also not terribly interesting for me to draw. I don't develop my skills doing it. I guess my 80-20 would be. It's going to sound really dumb, but just like a 1, 2, 3, like a process. You like tell a little story in three scenarios. Like you just walk people through it with like 3 little separate images or 3 states, and then the other one is just like going, can you make it? Yeah, can you bring like an abstract concept into a sort of physical scenario, a real world scenario, and just picture that scenario, and then even if you don't really quite remember the concept perfectly, you remember the scenario, and then it makes sense. There was this.
Yeah.
I'll try and give an example of from one a long way back. It was a really nice concept. I thought it was emotional hot potato, which so that's a nice metaphor. It's somebody else's metaphor, and the idea is that the dad's at work and he gets shouted at by the boss, and so he's in a really bad mood. He comes home. And then the dad shouts at his wife because he's pissed off, and then the wife like gets angry at the kids, and then eventually the kids get angry at the dog and kick the dog, and then the dog pees on the mat and runs out the door. And like just making that like a nice visual story, I think just makes it stick so much more. So yeah.
Interesting, and that kind of goes back to the visual or the hidden cost of something that you're visualizing, the thing that people wouldn't normally see. You don't realize on a day-to-day basis that how far your positive and negative emotions travel.
You're right, yeah, and you see, you put it out visually, and you see it cascade down these things, yeah, which otherwise you don't. Easy just to fade away. You don't notice it, so you make it really tangible, and visual, yeah.
And you mentioned 3 stages. I would have thought that the 80-20 would be 2 stages, just to keep it simple. Why 3?
That's a good question. I very often find that 3 is what I need. Why 3?
Plays are often in 3 acts.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, is this it's this sort of thesis, antithesis, synthesis. Like you set up the status quo. Here's the challenge to it, and here's the resolution. I think maybe the 3 has that kind of element to it. It's like you're starting from nowhere whenever you're looking at one of these sketches. So you have to set the scene, and then you're saying, here's the problem, and then here's the solution. And they're not all like that by any means, but I feel like 3 comes up again and again, and maybe that's why. I have to think about that.
And I was just thinking about a random quote that's done well that I got from a mentor. 80% of communication is miscommunication. I don't know if you've heard that before. A lot of times you think you're talking about the same thing because maybe you're using the same words, but you each attach very different meanings to it.
Yeah.
So sometimes you could get, you agree, you're like, oh yeah, I agree. Or somebody's nodding their head because they don't want to seem like they're disagreeing, but they don't really get it, what you're saying as you intended it. So, okay, I'm thinking about, so for your process, you would start to think about a physical scenario of when sometime that happened to you.
Yeah, I'm trying to think about the miscommunication part, because I use a lot of words in my sketches, right? They're often, I mean, some of them are just like laying out words on a page, and I feel like
something that's surprising about your work too, compared to other visual people. I feel like they almost try to minimize the number of words, and then you have a lot of words on yours.
Yeah, because I think like words are so like you write a paragraph to try and explain something, and then you're absolutely right, they can be interpreted in many different ways, and you think you've got the message across, but you haven't necessarily. And so I think by combining the words and the visuals, I have like at least two chances to try and to like dial down on, no, this is what I mean by it. So you take something quite abstract like autonomy or two-factor authentication, and you can explain it, but then you have a picture of it as well, and these two things go together, and now you've made it much clearer, and much less likely to be misunderstood. I do think when I talk about the feedback that I get along with sketches, the main thing I realize is that something I thought was obvious and evident, and I'd assumed when I was doing this, just clearly wasn't. And so I think that's where the miscommunication is. So the more feedback I get along the way, the less likely I'm going to come out at the end with too much miscommunication, I think.
Is there a way, I know this is putting you on the spot and you normally develop it, but for that one, is there a way you think about visualizing that one? It could be 80% of communication is miscommunication, or one that I think about a lot is the curse of knowledge, that the expert has this idea that it's so obvious to them, and then they explain it to someone else and like, isn't this obvious? And they're like, no idea what you just said.
Yeah, no, that's a really good idea. I just what would my thought process be for that? Like, I think it would be kind of interesting, wouldn't it? I think when you have like an 80-20, it's interesting to have like a block of text, somebody saying something that has a number of things to it, at least 10 words to it, because then you've got like an 8 and a 2 that you can sort of visualize. But I don't know. I can imagine some scenario where somebody's explaining something, and it seems, saying, hey, here's what we're going to do, and then somebody goes off and does some completely the opposite because they got completely the wrong end of the stick. And there, I had to sit down and think, what could you explain slightly ambiguously that might also be, I don't know, end up with a kind of funny outcome with somebody doing something
right,
not intended.
So in there we have two, so far it sounds like two layers. Like one scene is the person explaining it, and then the other scene is the person doing something very different.
Yes.
Than what was said. And then so, okay, what would be, you could clearly see that, like a day-to-day example of that. Yeah,
I would. This is the sort of thing I would ruminate on during the week. I probably, come up with one on the spot and then come up with a better one on Thursday.
Yeah. Do you do a deliberate rumination on it during the week, or is it just more natural back of your mind? Like, is it on your commute, or you're riding a bike, or taking a dog for a walk?
I sometimes found that one of the things that works for me as a process when I'm trying to do things for a week is actually, as I mentioned, I have this big list that I might be picking from. Sometimes the best thing I can do on Monday is just choose which one I want to do. And then I'll make a new sketch and I'll call it what it's going to be. And then even if that's as far as I go, that means it sort of gets my mind working on this, looking for ideas through the week. So it's not that I'll sit down necessarily until it's time to do it and go, how am I going to do this? But I think, once I've settled on what I'm going to do, there is like a little thought process in the back of my mind, which is like, by the end of this week, I need to have figured this out. So what is a good way to do this? And
I like
walking
that
along and I'm thinking about it. But I do find like if I haven't settled on what I'm going to do at the beginning of the week, then none of that process is working, and it's not going to.
And by doing one sketch, you kind of get the ball rolling. Of like even on this call, we kind of you identified a layout, a way it could be. Then there's a stuck point, and then that would be where you pause. So you almost do that where you try to lay it out, get it out at a basic level, and then ruminate on the hard parts.
Yeah, and I might just even take 5 minutes just to do a really rubbish sketch of that. And sometimes I'll just, I don't know, save it, put it on my phone, and then periodically take a look at it and go, is that working or is that not working? And that process helps me get to a better place as well. Yeah.
Yeah, this is awesome. There's just so many different takeaways on multiple levels here. If there was one thing you wanted to share with people that of everything we said is the most important for someone who mainly used to writing with words and wants to get into visuals, what's the main thing you suggest for them?
Yeah, I think it gets to be a little bit of a cliche, but I do a lot of something like triathlon, for example, and I always find that swimming is the one that people don't like, and I think that, or they absolutely love it, but the swimming is like I just can't swim. I can't do triathlon because I can't swim. And I think drawing is one of those things where people are like, yeah, I can write stuff, I can talk to somebody, of course, but I just can't draw. And I just think it is wrong. Like, in order to communicate usefully visually, you don't have to be good at drawing. And there's no question, like, obviously, the more you practice, if you buy a book like Rapid Viz and you give it a go and you do one a day for 2 years, you're going to get good. But I think that the biggest obstacle is that people just don't try in the first place. Like Dan Rome's thing, if you can draw a circle and you can draw some lines, you can do something. I would say, maybe one thing I would say is drawing people is the biggest obstacle. People can draw boxes and squares and like draw a process chart or whatever, but actually where people get immediately stuck is, I just can't draw people. So there are, actually, I did a sketch of like, here's some different ways, really simple ways to draw people. I remember learning one, which was you can draw star people. You literally draw a star. Like there's a vague point for a head, and then the arms are 2 star points, and the legs are 2 star points.
Stars. Yeah,
it's literally a star, and it just looks like a person, and it looks good enough to get a message across that it's a person. And I think just getting slightly comfortable with going, I'm not going to chicken out of drawing a person. I'm just going to do it because I've got this easy way. It's just a star. I think that really, really helps. But the main thing I think is just to get going and not think that you can't do it because you can't draw, because it doesn't need to be fancy.
Yeah, awesome. Great advice. And where can people learn more about you and follow you online?
Yeah, good question. So most of the stuff is all at sketchplanations.com. It's a little bit of a mouthful. And then I do post things on Twitter and Instagram if people prefer to go there. Even Facebook. I should start doing it on LinkedIn probably, because some of them would go there. But basically sketchplanations.com. I've also got a personal site, but it basically says sooner or later everything I know will be on Sketchplanations. So that's a better place to go.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for your time. And just want to acknowledge you. You've created, when you think about it, when it comes to illustrating complex ideas around like mental models or ideas like that, you've done more and better sketches than probably anyone on that. I don't think so. It's kind of an amazing thing for humanity, and I really mean that. And on our, they've gotten tons of shares when we've shared them. So hopefully it's helping people remember and learn new ideas faster.
Well, that's a remarkable thought. Yeah, thank you. And I have to say, like, actually having people, when you've got a platform and people are listening, it's a great motivation to keep doing it. And I don't have any intention to stop yet. My list of ideas is still long, and it gets bigger, more than one idea per week. So hopefully I'll be doing it for some time yet. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. Bye, Jono.
Michael, it's been a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to The Michael Simmons Show. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes. If you found value in today's episode, we would greatly appreciate a 5-star rating on your favorite podcast player.